It's March 2014, and in joint work with Shan and Jerry, I've completed a new working paper that I'm going to be releasing as an NBER Working Paper, and on the next slide I'll show you how to download it. In this lecture, I want to briefly talk about why the paper is interesting and a literature that I hope that will develop building on our paper. So, in cities today, there's three different ways to get around a city. And the faster you can move within a city, the more people you can trade with, the more jobs you can access, the more shops you can go to, the more people you can meet. There's cars, which are fast and expensive. There are subways, but only a few cities have those. And there is buses and walking. Walking is slow and cheap. Buses are slow and cheap. So we're talking about metro buses. And this paper is set in the United States. While there have been many papers about the private car market, both on the supply and the demand side, there have been basically no papers at all about public transit buses. So, for example, in Los Angeles, we spend a fair bit of money on the Santa Monica Blue Bus. And this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And our paper is taking a look using data from the National Transit Database on the supply and demand for bus service. And let me motivate why this is interesting in some of our big findings. So I think what's interesting here is, unlike with the private car market, where someone might buy a Toyota Prius and Toyota sells it, and that's a private transaction between a utility maximizing household and a profit maximizing firm, in the case of public transit, you have these transit agencies like Chicago's transit agency, Santa Monica's transit agency. These are non-profits. These are governmental organizations, and they have a monopoly on providing public transit services for their service area. They purchase from private profit-maximizing sellers. They purchase buses. And the first fact that jumps out at us, so in our study, we do all this empirical work using data from 1997 till 2011. And for each of the roughly 500 transit agencies in the U.S., we're focusing solely on buses, not on subways. And we're examining the decision of the transit agencies to scrap the current buses they own. And then when they scrap buses, what replacement decisions do they make? What investments in new buses do they make? And several facts jump out at us. The first fact that jumps out, and this is part of the title, the role of energy prices, is that when energy prices go up, the bus fleet does not become more fuel efficient. So in the case of private cars, when gas prices go up, cars become more fuel efficient, just from the simple laws of demand. People want a more fuel efficient vehicle, like a Toyota Prius, when the price of gasoline is higher. And for-profit sellers anticipate this, and as the induced innovation hypothesis predicts, they design and sell more fuel-efficient vehicles when the price of energy goes up. In contrast, in the case of public buses, we don't find that fact. And this is despite the fact that South Korea, Japan, and China all make fuel-efficient vehicles, but U.S. transit agencies don't buy these vehicles, and we explore that in our paper. And we argue that a big chunk of the explanation for this zero elasticity between the price of gasoline and the fuel economy of the bus fleet is the Buy America requirements, that transit agencies can get a large discount on purchasing public capital like buses if they buy American. There's this Buy American mandate for public procurement that gives strong incentives for transit agencies to buy U.S. buses. And this provides some protection for these domestic sellers. We investigate the supply side, and the U.S. bus industry is made of these firms that I had never heard of, like Gillig and New Flyer. And these guys have some monopoly power because they don't face foreign competition. General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler face competition from Toyota, but there's no analog in the bus market, and that lack of competition tends to retard the incentive to innovate. We also find that regulation matters. Those transit agencies, like in Los Angeles, that face particulate matter regulation from the Clean Air Act, are more likely to scrap their diesel buses and purchase cleaner hybrid and CNG buses. And so we find that all three of these factors, energy prices, regulation, and federal subsidies, all affect the procurement of transit agencies. And we think that a broader issue here is the energy efficiency of the government capital stock. Government's a big part of our economy. Does it have strong incentives to be fuel and energy efficient? The private sector faces this cost minimization condition. Does the public sector face an analogous one? We think this is going to lead to an interesting set of research papers in the future. If this work interests you, you'll soon be able to download this as an NBER working paper posted at this address here. And I will report back soon on our continued research on this topic.